Is success actually dangerous? Well, from a spiritual standpoint, it can be, because success tempts us to rely on ourselves instead of God. And we can work for a goal for years and realize that the challenge of trusting God is actually more dangerous, is actually harder when we are successful, because all of a sudden we tend to forget God. And in 2 Samuel chapter 5, we're going to see David finally becoming king over all Israel after nearly 20 years of waiting. He's going to capture Jerusalem, he's going to establish the capital, he's going to defeat the Philistines. He sees God's promises fulfilled, and yet the most surprising lesson about David, even after becoming king, David keeps asking God what to do next. And today we're going to see how fulfilled promises still require dependence on God, and how this chapter ultimately points towards the everlasting reign of Jesus Christ. Figure out all of this in this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get a little bit of context into the chapter. Okay, so 2 Samuel chapter 5 is a turning point in the Old Testament, because David has already been anointed by Samuel in 1 Samuel chapter 16. He was recognized as king over Judah in 2 Samuel 2, and after years of persecution, exile, waiting, civil war, all Israel comes to Hebron to anoint him as king. And the chapter records three major events. The first one is that he's crowned over the united nation. The second is that he captures Jerusalem and makes it Israel's new capital. And then the third is that he defeats the Philistines twice by seeking God's guidance before each battle. So the chapter, again, this is marking the beginning of the new Davidic kingdom. And every major biblical storyline, from the temple to the Messiah, from the Psalms to the New Jerusalem, flows through the events recorded here. So this is a turning point. Very important chapter. Okay, so let's read the first 10 verses. David's going to become king. Jerusalem is going to be captured. And my question to you is, why did God make David wait so long? Verse 1. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "Look, we are your bone and flesh. For some time while Saul was king over us, it was you who led us out Israel and brought it in. The Lord said to you, 'It is you who shall be shepherd of my people, Israel. You shall be ruler over Israel.' So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord. And they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. At Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and at Jerusalem he reigned over all Israel and Judah 30 years. Verse 6. The king and his men marched to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who said to David, 'You will not come in here, even the blind and the lame will turn you back,' thinking, 'David cannot come in here.' Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, which is now the city of David. David had said on that day, 'Whoever would strike down the Jebusites, let him get up the water shaft to attack the lame and the blind, those whom David hates.' Therefore it is said, 'The blind and the lame shall not come into the house.' David occupied the stronghold and named it the city of David. David built the city all around from the Millo inward, and David became greater and greater, for the Lord of hosts was with him." Okay, so why do all the tribes finally accept David? They respond by saying that we are your bone and flesh. Okay, so they recognize that they share an identity. David is one of them. And the second is that they remind David that even during Saul's reign, David was already leading Israel in battle, and that his leadership had been evident long before he wore the crown. And the final thing as well is that they said, "The Lord said to you, 'It is you who shall be shepherd of my people,'" right? So there is a progression that we notice. The first is that we have a shared identity, you have a proven character, and then that the Lord is actually guiding you all the way through. And the people, they acknowledge what God already declared many years later. And The thing is, God's promises are the same, but human hearts, our hearts are wicked, deceitful, and we'll take a while to actually understand what's going on. David waits almost 20 years, that's interesting, but the reason why is because he was being prepared. Imagine if David was king like immediately after Goliath. I don't think he would possess the humility that now defines him, right? So again, the wilderness, being out there, actually transformed him in a way that, I don't think he would be the shepherd king. But that's another thing, right? Why does he have to be the shepherd king? He has to be the shepherd king because he's going to shepherd the people of Israel. One of the richest descriptions of leadership in the Bible is the shepherd. And the reason why is because kings in the ancient world often describe themselves as shepherds, because a shepherd is the one who protects, feeds, guides, seeks the lost, risks himself for the flock, right? He does not dominate, he does not exploit, he doesn't enrich himself. The shepherd, right, calls everyone under his flock, guides everyone, feeds everyone. That's the most important thing that the shepherd does. Okay, let's read verses 11 to 16. The focus here is going to be on the kingdom of David growing, and my question to you is, what makes a kingdom truly great? Verse 11 to 16. King Hiram of Tyre sent messengers to David along with cedar trees and carpenters and masons who built David a house. David then perceived that the Lord had established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. In Jerusalem, after he came from Hebron, David took more concubines and wives, and more sons and daughters were born to David. These are the names of those who were born to him in Jerusalem: Shemua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, and Ephelet. Okay, so what do we uncover in verses 11 to 16? We see that David's kingdom continues to grow, and we see a few things that I think is important. First one is that David has a growing family, and it's interesting because the kingdom expands, David's household also expand, but in Deuteronomy chapter 17, we learnt that kings were not allowed to multiply wives, right? They're not allowed to have more wives. But we see that David actually has more concubines and wives. And the future chapters are going to show how this is going to actually unravel David and unravel his son Solomon in the future as well. It's interesting. The Bible doesn't interrupt the story with commentary, but instead it allows history to reveal the wisdom or folly of human choices. And it's interesting, this is going to become a very important stumbling block for David later on, in later chapters. Okay, let's read verses 17 to 25. David's going to defeat the Philistines, and we're going to see a few things here. God being asked before battle for help. We're going to see the Philistines, they attack immediately, and we're also going to see a few more things, but we'll get into that later. Verse 17. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, all the Philistines went up in search of David, but David heard about it and went down to the stronghold. Now the Philistines had come and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you give them into my hand?" The Lord said to David, "Go up, for I will certainly give the Philistines into your hand." So David came to Baal Perazim, and David defeated them there. He said, "The Lord has burst forth against my enemies before me like a bursting flood." Therefore that place is called Baal Perazim. The Philistines abandoned their idols there, and David and his men carried them away. Once again the Philistines came up and were spread out in the valley of Rephaim. When David inquired of the Lord, he said, "You shall not go up. Go around to their rear, and come upon them opposite the balsam trees. When you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, then be on the alert, for then the Lord has gone out before you to strike down the army of the Philistines." David did just as the Lord had commanded him, and he struck down the Philistines from Geba all the way to Gezer. Okay, a few things here that are important. The first thing I think is that we see that David asks God before both battles, right? And that's, I think, a very deep point of the chapter. David already won the first battle, and yet he asks God again, right? Wouldn't the same strategy work? But the thing is, right, David refuses to rely on himself. He refuses to rely on his own wisdom, knowledge, understanding. He asks God for assistance. And the second time, God gives completely different instructions, different military instructions. Instead of attacking directly, David must circle behind the Philistines, wait until he hears the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees. And the thing is, God is not really a formula, right? Faith is a relationship with God. And many people drift spiritually because they substitute their past experiences with God for present dependence on God. David, never assumes. He asks again and again and again and again for God's guidance, wisdom, courage, strength. And he keeps asking. For me, I think the deepest part of this chapter is about fulfilled promises, right? David finally has the throne, he has the kingdom, he has the capital, he has the recognition, he even has military success because he just defeated the Philistines. Yet, he is not really distinguished by these qualities, because Saul also had military victories, and a kingdom, and a throne, and a capital, and all of these things. But the difference is that success has not made David less prayerful. It made him more prayerful, okay? Those who are closest to God become more dependent on him, not less dependent, okay? It's not like God is just the training wheels and then you just let him go, right? The greatest danger after God answers our prayers is believing that we no longer need to pray to him. And David avoids that trap. He realizes, I need God every single second of my life, and that is why he flourishes. Okay, let's see how this chapter fulfills Jesus Christ. So nearly every section of this chapter points beyond David to Christ in more ways than one, right? So the first thing is that David is the shepherd king over all Israel, and Jesus declared in John chapter 10 verse 11 that he is the good shepherd. David captures Jerusalem and establishes Zion, and Jesus enters Jerusalem as its rightful king. He dies there for the sins of the world, and then he rises again, and from there sends the gospel to all the nations. And the earthly Zion or Jerusalem gives way to the new Jerusalem, right, where Christ reigns forever. And David repeatedly asks the Father before acting. In the same way, Jesus lives in perfect dependence upon his Father, saying in John chapter 5 verse 19, the Son can do nothing of himself, but what he seeth the Father do, the Son does also. Whatever he sees God do, he can do as well, right? So David's kingdom unites Israel for a little time, but Jesus's kingdom unites people from every tribe, nation, language, and tongue forever. This is why we read in Luke chapter 1 verse 32 to 33. He will be the great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his ancestor David. He will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. Christ's reign is eternal. David's reign was glorious, but not the same as Jesus Christ's reign. Okay, so let's apply this chapter in our everyday life. I think the most important thing is to see God again and again and again, even in familiar situations. And I don't think you should assume that just because something happened yesterday or that something worked for you yesterday, that automatically you don't need to run your important decisions by God. And even if you feel like, oh, I just feel like it's just going to work, I don't need to ask God. No, still come back. Lord, what would you have me do? Lord, help me to pray to you. Even though I feel like I can do it on my own, I want you to actually help me out, because otherwise I lose that dependence on God. And the moment you lose that dependence on God, start taking things into your own hands, and then you know what happens. You start to fall to sins of various kinds. Alright, so that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. We saw that God's promises often take years of preparation before they're fulfilled, that waiting actually forms the character needed to steward God's gifts, that leadership within a biblical sense actually is defined by shepherding rather than your own self-promotion or whatever selfish desires you may have, and that success should deepen our dependence on God, not diminish it. and that David's kingdom ultimately points forward to the everlasting kingdom of Jesus Christ. Next time we're going to move to 2 Samuel chapter 6, where David brings in the Ark of the Covenant towards Jerusalem, but the celebration is going to turn into a tragedy when Uzzah reaches out to steady the Ark and dies instantly. Alright, so that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate the show and follow. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.